Greetings and welcome to the Brown PaperBag series. I'm with your co-host, Mr. a.kolaproduction.
Thank you. I'm here with your host, Mr. Brandon Lewis.
And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Marni Brown, who's a sociology professor, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about intersectionality and what that is.
Let's see what's in the bag.
Yes, please. Jerusalem.
Oh, Lord. Okay. We'll let you start it off, Kola.
You want me to start off?
Yes.
Man, that's a good word because everything that's going on in today's world, I feel like it revolves around Jerusalem in a certain sense. I try not to be too big on religion, but Jerusalem is a country of strong religious background. Due to all the terror attacks, I feel like it's tied to the foundation of Jerusalem, or comes back to Jerusalem. And I don't know. There's so much to say on it. I don't know where I want to go with that. So I'm just gonna let it be. Go ahead.
Okay. So Jerusalem, for me, is sort of like the pinnacle or the foundation of Christianity. When I hear that word, that's what I'm thinking about. And I know there's a lot of historical context and things that you can place within that context, but that's primarily what I think of. And I think a lot of times, kind of like what Kola was discussing, in this today's age, when I hear the word Jerusalem, I also think about sort of like conflict and things like that. It's a battle of power. It's a battle of sort of like religious will. Is almost like my religion is better than yours or whatnot, and that's been a sort of like an age-old story. And so I think that when you do think about Jerusalem, for me, I think about the idea of peace. I think about the idea of love, but I also think about sort of like the yang to that, like the opposite, to where there is a battle of land and a battle of religious superiority. And so I think that's a great word that I probably need to research a little bit more to kind of have more of a foundation and solid understanding, but those are some of the ideas that come to mind when I think of Jerusalem.
Yes, Marni.
Oh, so it's my turn.
Yes.
So as a sociologist, when I think of Jerusalem, one of the questions I want to ask is, so who's asking about Jerusalem? Because I think depending on the person and the background that they come from, Jerusalem probably has lots of different meanings. So as somebody who was raised Jewish, the meaning of Jerusalem has significance to the Jewish homeland. And I think if I was raised from a different faith, it would probably have different significant meanings. But as I've grown up and I've learned about other cultures and experiences in the world, something that really resonates with me is conflict and multiple different groups wanting to have a place of home, wanting to have a place of peace and solitude, and wanting to find a place where they feel safe. And I think Jerusalem has the potential to embody that, but many different groups that are in conflict with each other want that same place. So I think it symbolizes a lot of the different conflicts that resonate in the world. One place for a lot of different people, and how can those people come together and share, same space. Right. And hopefully we'll get there. I don't think we're there yet. And clearly where we are right now in our political times embody that. So Jerusalem's pretty significant for, I think, what's happening in today's times.
You both summed up exactly everything. I was like, I don't know what to say about that.
Well, I look to Marni. So as you can tell, as I mentioned, we do have a very special guest, Dr. Marni Brown, and she's going to bring a wealth of knowledge. Like I said, her background is in sociology, so there's a lot that we can unpack within that. But we're also talking about intersectionality, and where you're looking at race, class, gender, a host of things that I'll let Dr. Brown get a little bit more specific about. But it's a pleasure to have her, and we're going to start off with the first question from a.kolaproduction.
So, Ms. Marni, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
My first question will be, I feel like it's an age-old question. What is the difference between sociology and psychology, in your opinion?
Sure. As a sociologist working on a college campus, you get asked this quite a bit, especially from incoming students or students that are interested in the major. One of the ways I describe the difference is sociologists are kind of scientists of what people do and how they go about carrying their everyday lives throughout the social world. So one of the things that we like to do as sociologists is kind of ask the question, how do you know what you know? right? So where does your knowledge come from? What influences your knowledge? And why do you do what you do? Whether it's from the way that you dress or how you sit or the way that you talk or how you eat, because those actions that you engage in are a product of what you've been influenced by, whether they're different social institutions like family or the media or religion, or is it an intersection of those different institutions. So that's, for the most part, what sociologists are interested in. They also study large social systems, they study the interactions between people, right? So the way that you and I sit here and talk to one another, there's a shared interaction happening between us. Sociologists are interested in what's happening between you and I. I think psychologists, and I'm not a psychologist, but from what I understand, they're more interested in how that happens. Right, so they're looking at it from a more cognitive perspective. They're also trying to understand the different developmental processes you might be going on throughout your life and how that might impact your ability to relate to other people in the social world that you're a part of.
That's great. So in psychology, it's such a wide range of areas you can study and things you can focus on. What areas are your focus and what made you choose those areas?
In sociology? In sociology.
So I joined sociology with an interest in studying gender and sexuality, and luckily I studied under some wonderful mentors that not only taught me how to better understand gender and sexuality, but they introduced me to race and class, which has brought me to intersectionality, and really understanding that the social categories that kind of shape who we are and the way in which you might personally identify and the way that other people identify you all exist at like an intersection. Or we might think about them as kind of interlocked. So the way that you understand race is at its intersection with gender. So if I was to talk about myself, I can't just describe myself as a woman, I have to describe myself as a raced woman, as a white woman, because that then gives you a much more complex story of than what my privileges have been and also maybe some of my oppressions or disadvantages. So that really helped me understand then what I could do with sociology, which is really get a hold of how people experience the world that they live in, looking at those different categories at their intersection. So that's where my interests lie in sociology, particularly when we look at them when people maybe disclose information about themselves. So if I was to tell you that I was gay, how does telling you that, right, shape how you'd interact with me, particularly when I tell you that and my race and my class and my gender are all interacting, right, that shared experience we're having.
So my question would be, I know that you probably tackle a lot of different things, right? But if there's one thing that you could say that you're really passionate about, and I know that you study gender and sexuality, and that's, I guess that's probably your major focus while you're receiving your PhD. But like where we are today, 2017, you know, I'm thinking about, and I was thinking about this as I knew I was going to be interviewing you. I was thinking about the idea of the feminist movement and how that's changed over, you know, decades or whatnot. But if you could choose one particular thing now that that you're passionate about, or that you think others should be sort of more focused on paying attention to, what would it be and why?
I appreciate you asking me that because it has shifted as I've left graduate school, now that I've been teaching for a handful of years. The focus has really been on social inequality, particularly white privilege. Now that I've studied more about race and colorblind theory, critical race theory, I've really had a chance to dig into more Black feminist work from the 80s and the 90s and more recently as well. I've really taken the responsibility of wanting to know as much as I can about the way white privilege works in a society where the racial oppression is so omnipresent in our social institutions and within the history of our society. So I feel it's really important to have not only people that have experienced racial oppression, but people that have been almost blind to their racial privilege, to have those moments where they sit down and really start to kind of unravel that onion that has allowed them to be privileged in ways that they've been unaware of. And since I've been afforded that knowledge, I feel that I have a responsibility to continue to do that with others, whether it's in the classroom or it's in ongoing conversations. But I feel this, I don't want to say, responsibility might be a strange word, but I feel now in teaching that it's really, really important that students are given that information that they haven't been given before. The importance of talking about race, not just from a victim or oppressed standpoint, and understanding the way privilege has completely shaped those experiences, and looking at race in multiple ways. So the power systems that shape race are not just top down or bottom up. They're influenced in all different ways. Race is incredibly stratified and hierarchical, but at the same time, within all those different positions, you've got other racial groups that are trying to also just maintain a little bit of an edge. So
right.
it's not only is it not just black and white, but within each kind of racial leverage, there's also dynamics going on with ethnicity, with class, with gender. So kind of finding out and understanding all these different ways race has really shaped our lived experiences, not only throughout history, but in contemporary times right now. I feel really called to better understand that and to have those conversations in the classroom.
Do you think it's more of a battle of us trying to continue to understand each other, and that anything that represents some type of difference is just problematic? Is that kind of?
I think part of it is understanding somebody that's different than you, but I think it's also just as valid in understanding yourself. Because I think for a long time, history and then what we've learned in our schools has kind of set up this idea that in order to know about myself, I need to know more about you. And I think the flip of it is, in order to understand myself, I need to look at what has actually happened to myself, right? So if I've been a part of a group that has been committing oppression, I need to take a look at that and kind of understand that and be accountable to that. And that just doesn't exist across racial lines. That exists across class lines and religious lines and gender lines and sexuality lines. And I think when we come to terms with that a little bit, we kind of own that history, we'll have some more common ground. And I think the ways that we've been separating ourselves will be more difficult to maintain.
So I really want to jump in, and I want to ask you
Sure.
about the idea about white guilt, and I want to ask you about this idea, well, that wasn't me, that was my ancestors, and so a lot of times people are dismissive of that, right?
Of
So I do want to have that conversation, but I'm not going to right now.
Okay,
We'll
wait.
But the question that I wanted to ask was, because we talked about the gender piece and I think the identity piece, and one thing that if I'm not mistaken, you have been an advocate or vocal about, and I want you to kind of explain what it is, because I don't think I could do it justice. The idea of the bathroom sort of situation with the like the transgenders,
Right.
and I wanted you to kind of, for one, just tell us a little bit about what that problem is, and why do you. What would be your argument for saying, or what is your argument, I guess? I don't want to put words in your mouth. What would be your argument? What are you trying to advocate for within that conversation?
Right. So I think it comes from two places for me. One, as a feminist, and then two, as like an all-gender ally. I identify as somebody who is cisgender, and I find that regardless of the gender someone identifies with, we all should have access to bathrooms.
Right, you said cisgender. Can you?
So cisgender, there are different ways in which we can gender identify, and often sometimes people that their gender aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and that sex was used to assign them a gender, and they've maintained that throughout their life, and they identify as cisgender. People that are transgender have often changed or adjusted the gender that they were assigned at birth. So I try when I can to kind of claim my cisgenderness, because for those that are transgender, there's often some claiming that happens with that. So to kind of normalize that experience, it seems that claiming cisgenderness is kind of part of that process. So to speak on the notion of all gender bathrooms for those that are, let's say, gender nonconforming or gender fluid or transgender, it is very difficult in public spaces to access bathrooms. Research shows us that it has for years now. There is no reason why someone who does not identify as gender masculine or gender feminine should not have access to a public bathroom space, and an all gender bathroom does that. The other reason, which I think sometimes gets sidelined, is there tends to be this conversation, this kind of fear conversation of what happens if we almost like contaminate bathroom spaces, even though most of us do that in our own homes, right? We have kind of this all gender bathroom space in our homes.
That's true,
But in public spaces, when we designate a space as all female, which we do in public spaces, we've labeled for someone who's interested in finding where women are the best place to find them. So if we're looking to create spaces that are safer for women, which for many seems to be important, especially on, let's say, college campuses, it only makes sense to me, and I say this as a feminist who believes in all gender equality, to have all gender bathrooms where women are less targeted in terms of where they might be located. And it's quite rare, and research has shown this, to find there are issues in all gender bathroom spaces. People usually just come and do what they need to do.
I have a question regarding that last
Sure.
thing you made prior to my question.
Sure.
Do you feel like if we had a bathroom, like you said, for each gender class, would that not create more separation or more diversity in the way that people are going about their comfort, or just knowing that it exists or not?
So I think what I'm most interested in would be bathrooms that are considered all gender, so anyone regardless of their gender could use them. So you and I could access the same gender, or the same bathroom even though our gender looks different.
Just like the bathroom has a sign where it could be a male or female.
Yes, or I don't even know if I would designate it as anything with symbols, because there are people that don't necessarily identify with a specific gender.
So
Those that are maybe
locked out of that.
right, those that are maybe gender fluid. So an all gender bathroom might just be a bathroom with several stalls. I would also make them family friendly, so they have changing tables in them. Something that I often think about is when men are out with their children, and if they have children that are daughters, the issues that they run into and taking them into
I have that all the
bathrooms.
time, yeah.
So I just find on a whole host of issues, all gender bathrooms might just create more options for people to use the bathroom in public spaces.
Right, and then maybe we just label it bathrooms.
Bathroom.
You know,
And there are
really.
places around the world that do this and don't seem to have the problem. I think part of it is that in our Western society, we work really hard to separate people into male and female categories. And when I say really hard, I mean like we put the work into separating the bathrooms.
Okay.
That's actually a lot of work. And to even enforce it, where if we just created an all-gender space, it actually wouldn't be that much work. I think we're much more comfortable actually coexisting in these more kind of mixed spaces than we are separating ourselves out, because then we get in there and we find that we have to regulate each other,
Right.
even if we don't realize we're doing it. And that's a lot of work.
So my last question is a little left of this topic that we're
Sure,
doing.
sure.
The other day I ran into a quote on Facebook. It said, "Money is no longer the root of all evil. Attention is."
Mm.
And I let that sink in for a little bit. I'm like, I think I actually could agree to that. Because in our society now, you can find a current event happening right in front of somebody,
That's right.
and they would want to record it instead of help out first.
Mhm.
They would want to be known that they were there instead of actually like
Mhm.
distinguishing the situation or adding to it or fixing it in some way, form, and fashion. So I just want to know, do you agree to that statement?
I'm not sure if I would necessarily agree, but I think I have an understanding of where it comes from. So I'm thinking a little bit about some older social theorists like Max Weber and Karl Marx, and the way that they would talk about money and power and status and the importance that they hold in society. So if we think about those three ideas, money, power, and status, I think attention and celebrity and fame kind of fall in there. So I think for some people, grabbing attention is so close to grabbing the same sort of power or feeling that money might afford you, and especially now, more than we've ever seen before. The way in which you have the ability for someone else to validate you through these technology efforts, right? So that attention is so immediate. I think there's something, there's almost like a monetary value afforded to that we haven't necessarily seen before. So if I can record this and it goes up on social media and I can show you that I have 20,000 likes, it might not be monetary, but there is some value to it. And I think we've seen people go from living very simple lives to then becoming these viral celebrities, or virtual celebrities, excuse me, and we don't have precedent for that, right? And that's very new to us. So I think it's part of this like money, power, status, fame sort of thing that a lot of people are still really bought into.
And you think that'll like grow more or actually diminish more in the future?
I think it's gonna evolve.
Think about.
Right, I think it will. I mean, I think the role of technology and capitalism is only going to get finer. I think the time that someone's fame exists through social media is going to be short-lived, right? So to keep celebrity is not going to last all that long. Money, I think, is what's going to hold people down. And that seems harder and harder to get, right? Like so few people have money that lasts them long periods of time. People are coming across short stints of money. But money is becoming harder and harder to get your hands on. But the fame, the attention, more and more people can get now.
That's true.
Right? I mean, like I can record you doing a series like this,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like any of us can do this.
Yeah. It does take a lot of work.
Yes,
You
no.
take
That's right. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time.
But I was going to ask something, and there's a host of questions like I really want to kind of put out there while we have you here, but we had to stick to the format because of Cola. But one thing I did want to ask
We have
you.
to come back to the white guilt question.
Oh,
We
that's a
do.
good point. Oh, okay. So for one, I guess, what is your response? So I'm gonna have to do a two-part. What is your response when you hear this idea, or the notion of? Well, for one, let me ask you this: what is white guilt? That'd be the first thing, and then the second piece of that is when you're talking to students, when you're talking to individuals, and you have this backlash of, well, that wasn't me, or I don't accept this, or whatever. How do you sort of continue to advocate your message?
I think it's really complicated.
Without being overbearing, or
Right.
without being dogmatic, or whatever.
Right.
You know?
So I think it's really complicated, and I'm thinking back to some of the first things I said when we started here, right? Like I'm not this, I don't feel like I'm this person on this charge. I feel this responsibility more to myself than to anybody else. I need to know this information. I want to know this information. I've been shorthanded by the history that I have been taught. I feel responsible to me to know this. And I just feel like I'm in a fortunate position where I can share some of this with other people that I spend my days with. But I think what has happened is there are some white people, probably more than I probably tend to realize, that have these moments where they feel either slightly responsible or guilty for past that they've learned of. And I think this happens with some other groups from time to time, but probably more so with white people. And they make some apologies or they get involved in some ally work, but the way in which they become accountable for the actions of large groups is sometimes really harder to engage with, because what it involves is the white person being quiet.
So I guess with that being said, I want to end on a positive note, and that is being that we have so many different sort of movements that are going on now, right? And we have a lot of different attention being drawn to a host of and a wide range of issues. Like you said, we're using social media. There's so many different things that we're tackling. Do you think, from a sociologist's perspective, that we will continue to make great strides in reaching this certain sort of climate and things that you're sort of in hopes for?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think that, you know, there's always going to be some type of range of pushback, there's always going to be some type of sense of division, there's always going to be man's inhumanity toward man? So where do you think we're headed in the next century or whatnot?
I think it's always going to be in like ebbs and flows. I think that's part of what history has shown us, and as a sociologist, we pay attention to history. There are patterns there that are significant to why we do what we do, and it helps us understand and kind of negotiate expectations. But I would like to think, based on a lot of the research that has come out, even if you look at Alden Morris's work on Du Bois, who really kind of, you know, really laid out this large critique of sociology that said we have neglected one of the most significant founding figures of the discipline, mainly because he was a man of color. Right? I think as more and more people call out the racist, biased, classist, sexist, homophobic work that has been so present throughout American history, the more we can then heal and say, okay, so what do we want to be and who do we want to be? But that sort of work is hard work, and it's also not only the work of people from marginalized groups.
All right, so thank you for just coming today, Dr. Brown. Real quick before you leave, one last thing, you can sum it up, because I know that we're not supposed to. I know, but one last point that I would like you to kind of just leave the audience with. When they're thinking about this idea of intersectionality, you've talked a good deal about that. What's one last point that you would just like people in a sort of a simplistic way? Because a lot of people that watch the show, they may not understand what it is, and so this is going to be sort of like new information for them. So if you could tell us on a simplistic level what you want us to know about intersectionality, what would it be?
So what I'd like people to understand when they think about intersectionality is think about whatever makes you who you are. your race, your class, your gender, your sexuality. It coexists with other pieces of who you are. It never exists on its own. And in order to better understand yourself, look at where they come together.
Thank you so much. So we would like to thank you for coming today and speaking to us. And please continue to learn more about yourself so that therefore, by understanding more of yourself, you'll be able to understand others. I think that's one of the major messages that was indicated today. All right, so we're going to pass it to a.kolaproduction for the last part of the show.
So generally, the last part of the show is, we call it the book of the week, where if you had a book or something that you'd like to recommend for the people, you can put out there. But I know you also have other things you work on and other outlets for yourself. So is there any other areas that you like to people know?
Sure. So I've been really fortunate to work with two sociologists at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Joya Misra and Mihaela Stewart, and we have a book coming out called Gendered Lives and Sexual Beings, a feminist anthology. It's being published by Sage. It is actually going to print right now, and if you go to Sage Publications, you can find it on their page. If not, you can find me at marniabrown.com, or you can find me through Georgia Gwinnett College, and there's information about the book and upcoming publications for me there.
And can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Sure.
Just
Yes,
a
of
little-
course. Yeah, of course. It's a long name without any information. So the book is an anthology, so it's selected readings from gender and sexuality scholars, and it takes a look at the way gender and sexuality has really evolved and changed over the past century, particularly looking at ideas like masculinity, intersectionality, transgender issues, as well as international and global concerns.
I will be purchasing that book, so make sure you do the same, all right?
So it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you both so much.
Thank
I
you,
really
Dr.
appreciate
Brown.
being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in to another series of Brown Paper Bag.
Till next week.